Welcome to the channel. Part 3, Chapter 4. If only it was that simple. The self-created identity. In the ideal world, we would at this point have covered all the understanding required to obtain the capacity to direct our life experience in accordance with our will. However, there are certain negative associations that cause us to have negative experiences that require special attention and further understanding in order to properly be dealt with. The negative associations being referred to are those that make up what we will denominate as the self-created identity. Note, just as any other negative associations, these lead to negative experiences that create further negative associations, and thus the negative cycle is propagated. This results in us losing our capacity to direct our life experience as we see fit, and consequently, the predominant themes of our life are those of suffering and dissatisfaction. Note, keep in mind that negative associations are only characterized as negative since these create negative experiences, which as a reminder are experiences we do not wish to have. The self-created identity is, in a sense, the conceptualization we have of our identity and is a leading force within our life experience. While this grouping of negative associations remains a predominant force, lasting fulfillment will elude us and the themes of suffering and dissatisfaction will be prevalent. This is the reason why it is important to not only become aware of this thing, but to also actively work towards disengaging ourselves from the specific negative associations that make up the self-created identity. We will come to realize that any conceptualization we have of ourselves is not only unnecessary, but also quite detrimental for our ultimate goal of gaining the capacity to direct our life experience in accordance with our will. Why the self-created identity is especially difficult to deal with. What makes this specific type of negative associations especially tricky is that it is difficult to establish the connection between said negative associations and the detrimental long-term effects these have upon our life experience. This is by no means obvious, and we can actually fall into the delusion that these negative associations make our life experience better, because they do occasionally provide positive experiences in the form of short-lived fulfillment. However, we do not realize that this short-lived fulfillment comes at a great cost to us, as it actually strengthens the negative cycle within our life experience. This is exactly what happens with something like drugs. We like how they make us feel, but we sometimes are too short-sighted to see the detrimental, long-term consequences that eventually end up taking over and destroying our lives. How the self-created identity brings a short-lived fulfillment. Since the majority of us lack the capacity to direct our life experience as we please, the next best thing we can achieve is making ourselves and others see us as the person we wish we were. This is the necessary desire required for the self-created identity to come into existence. In a world where fulfillment does not elude us, there is no place for the self-created identity. When we succeed via the self-created identity in having others or ourselves see us as specific concepts we wish to be seen as, we achieve short-lived fulfillment. This state of fulfillment is what makes us addicted to the self-created identity. Because of this addiction, we not only end up strengthening the negative associations that comprise this, but we also end up expanding the self-created identity across our network of associations by creating more of the negative associations that comprise this. Unconsciously, of course. The problem with this thing is that, just like with any other drug, the consequences far outweigh the apparent benefit it brings us. The more we rely on the self-created identity for short-lived fulfillment, the more the associations that comprise and support this mechanism will expand and deepen into our network of associations. The real reason why the self-created identity is detrimental towards our ultimate goal and why we need to rid ourselves of it is not necessarily due to the addiction factor, but rather because the more it forms part of our life experience, network of associations, the more chances we have of falling into the state of dissatisfaction. How does this make us fall into the state of dissatisfaction? We all know why falling into the state of dissatisfaction is bad. When we are in this state, we become negative association factories, creating countless negative associations until the negative emotion dissipates. This in turn propagates the negative cycle. But now, how does the self-created identity increase the number of chances we have of falling into this state? Wanting to be seen as specific concepts is desire. So long as we are attempting to be seen as specific concepts, we are in a desirous state. Since the self-created identity is our sense of identity, we care very deeply to be seen as said concepts. This desire is tied to our very sense of self. There are not just some trivial desires that are lightly tied to our emotional center. These are desires that come from a fundamental need for fulfillment and are the utmost important to us. Due to the highly personal aspect, when we inevitably fail to have others or ourselves view us as the specific concepts we wish to be seen as, we will likely not be able to control our thoughts and emotions and thus are almost practically guaranteed to fall into the state of dissatisfaction. As the self-created identity expands within our network of associations, more and more situations in our life experience will trigger this mechanism, and thus we will find ourselves inevitably in the state of dissatisfaction as our normal state of affairs. Note: remember that associations are reactive, and if they are triggered, we have no say whether or not we have the resulting experience, although we do have control over the emotions and thoughts that follow. The prerequisites for the formation of the self-created identity. As a prerequisite to the negative associations that are part of the self-created identity forming, we must determine the concept we wish to be seen as. Examples of what this concept can be include successful, funny, attractive, kind, etc. Once we have decided upon the specific concept we wish to be seen as, we rely on our observation in order to gather intel pertaining to what exactly it means to personify this. We observe our environment and begin to form associations regarding our particular concept. Let's say that the concept we wish to be seen as is cool. If we wish to be seen as a specific concept, we must have ideas of what it means to be this specific concept. Otherwise, how can we embody the concept so as to have ourselves or others view us as the specific concept? By observing our environment, we begin taking note, establishing associations of what defines our specific concept. Note: these associations we begin to form in regard to our selected concept are not yet the negative associations that comprise the self-created identity. These associations simply form part of the infrastructure that supports the self-created identity. They form our understanding of our concept, which then enables us to embody said concept. We establish several associations via observations in which the specific concept forms part as an element. Together, these associations comprise the totality of our understanding pertaining to our concept. These associations have a unique configuration. They are comprised of two elements embedded within each other. Specifically, a thought, the concept, embedded within another thought. An example of one such association is the following. Having a nice car is cool. Here, the entire thought is having a nice car is cool, element 1, and the element embedded within the thought is cool, element 2, which is the concept we wish to be seen as. Notice how the association essentially tells us what cool is. The association, along with other ones that have our concept as an element, forms our understanding of our concept. And so, if we wish to be seen as cool, we know that we must have a nice car because we associate this with being cool. Note: remember that not all associations are formed via a strong emotion. The second manner by which associations are formed is by repetition. If we are constantly exposed to a specific message, observation over and over again via our environment, we will eventually create an association. The formation of the self-created identity. Once we have established any number of associations that comprise our understanding pertaining to a specific concept, the negative association finally forms, the one the self-created identity is actually made of. This negative association is comprised of the following two elements: I and the concept, whatever our concept may be. In this association, I represents the self-created identity. The self-created identity is not restricted to only one negative association. It will be comprised of as many associations as we have concepts we wish to be seen as. So if we also want to be seen as smart and beautiful, our self-created identity will be comprised of the following three negative associations: I, cool; I, smart; I, beautiful. Accordingly, we will also have established several associations for each negative association that makes up our understanding of each of the concepts: smart, cool, beautiful. And so, our self-created identity can be comprised of any number of negative associations, based on the number of concepts we wish to be seen as. Before proceeding any further, we need to make sure that we understand that I is not the self-created identity itself, but is only what represents this within our network of associations. I is the means by which the concepts are linked to our self-created identity. All the negative associations that consist of I and the concept, solely these two elements, are what constitute the self-created identity. Note: the self-created identity is not representative of what we are in any way. It is simply a creation of ours. Remember, what we are is the network of associations in its totality, and this is not something we can conceptualize, understand, or capture. All we can do is embody it. The functionality of the self-created identity. The function of the individual negative associations is to serve as a link between the self-created identity and all the associations that make up our understanding of said concept. This function is what actually is responsible for the negative experiences brought about due to the self-created identity, and why these associations are considered to be negative. They tie much of our experience to our sense of identity and thus result in us taking things personally. The function of these negative associations is literally to make us take everything that resonates with our understanding of the specific concept via the associations that make up our understanding of said concept personally. This is the unintended background function of the self-created identity. This is the function we are not aware of. All we are aware of is the short-lived fulfillment we receive and are addicted to. Note: in order to be able to stop unconsciously propagating the mechanism that is the self-created identity, we need to have the understanding by which we can gain the capacity to direct our life experience. If not, we will never let go of what brings us momentary fulfillment. We are not aware that wanting to be seen as specific concepts causes us extreme suffering and dissatisfaction, and that it is never wise to have this desire, since it leads to the formation of the self-created identity. Experiencing not being the concept, falling into dissatisfaction. As we discussed earlier, the self-created identity creates countless opportunities where we can fall into the state of dissatisfaction when we fail to be seen as the specific concept we desire to be seen as. This being the great danger the identity poses. However, more specifically, we fall into dissatisfaction due to experiencing not being the concept. Experiencing not being the concept, a negative experience, is not the same as not experiencing being the concept, a neutral experience. To illustrate, experiencing not being the concept is negative, meaning a negative experience, -1. Not experiencing being the concept is neutral, meaning a neutral experience, 0. Experiencing being the concept is positive, meaning a positive experience. 1. In our day-to-day life, we are not experiencing being the concept tied to the self-created identity at all times, and this is not a problem. We do other things, and our experience is comprised of many different happenings. We are not concerned with being the concept at all times. However, when we experience not being the concept, which we have established as being one we wish to be seen as, the experience is the equivalent of us losing something we already had. We were neutral and at 0, but now we are negative and are at -1. This experiencing not being the concept can happen in one of two ways, and is different from simply not experiencing being the concept. The first way is in relation to the associations that comprise our understanding of the concept. When one of these associations is somehow challenged by something or someone in our environment, we experience not being the concept the association represents. The more concepts we have tied to our self-created identity and the more associations we have that comprise our understanding of said concepts, the more opportunities we have for our sense of identity to be challenged throughout our day-to-day activities. For example, one of the concepts tied to our self-created identity is cool, and one of the associations that make up our understanding pertaining to the concept is comprised of the following two elements. 1. The thought, having a nice car is cool. 2. The concept, cool, with the actual association being having a nice car is cool, where the two elements are embedded within one another. If one of our friends comes around and makes a negative comment in regards to our car, we experience not being the concept indirectly by experiencing not meeting one of the criteria, associations that form our understanding pertaining to this concept. This places us at -1. At this point, if we lack the quality of having control over our emotions, we will easily undergo a negative experience. Most likely, our mind will begin to race with thoughts, and thus we will begin establishing negative associations, therefore propagating the negative cycle. What allows for the self-created identity to become active, the key to the functionality of this mechanism, is the concept that serves as the link between the association that makes up our understanding of the concept and the negative association itself, comprised of I and the concept. This mechanism is the reason why we take things personally. It is what ties our sense of identity to certain experiences. If the same scenario as the one described in our example took place with the key difference that we did not have the negative association consisting of I and cool, we would not be placed in a position where we would potentially fall into the state of dissatisfaction, even though we still had the association linking nice cars to the concept of cool, due to our sense of identity not being brought into question. The second way we can experience not being a concept is through unconscious comparison. When someone comes into our experience, via thoughts or direct life experience, who we recognize as a specific concept, and if this concept is one that is tied to our self-created identity, we automatically experience not being that concept, or in this case, being less, which is still a state of subtraction, -1. Note, the individual has to be someone who we consider our peer. It cannot be someone who, for example, we consider and accept as being out of our league. This is the case since the only reason we recognize them as the concept is because, according to our understanding pertaining to said concept, this person is actually more of this than we are. When we recognize somebody as a concept, which is tied to our self-created identity, it is only due to them being more of this than us. The recognition is the result of an unconscious comparison. Note, think about it. If person A has 20 million and being rich is one of the concepts tied to their self-created identity, person A is not going to consider another individual who only has 1 million, person B, to be as rich. However, if yet another individual comes along who has 50 million, person A will recognize that they are rich, reluctantly. Since we see them as more of this concept than we are, even if this is unconsciously, this will automatically make us experience being less of the concept, -1. When this happens, we are prone to having negative experiences, which can lead to falling into the state of dissatisfaction. Conclusion. The mechanism that is the self-created identity is constantly activating throughout our life in a reactive manner. This places us in situations in which we can easily have negative experiences and fall into the state of dissatisfaction if we are unable to control our thoughts and emotions. The more we want to be seen as specific concepts, the more our life experience will deal with these types of situations, where the self-created identity is activated as reactions. Throughout our life experience, if we are not aware of this mechanism, we will, in all likelihood, connect more concepts to it via the negative associations, and thus ultimately further propagate the negative cycle. What is crucial to understand here is that if the infrastructure, the associations, is present within our network of associations when faced with certain situations, we will not be able to alter our automatic reactions. Associations do not depend on our conscious mind to be triggered or not. They will be triggered despite our willpower or emotional stability. Now, it is within our control to determine our reaction to the initial trigger. However, as mentioned earlier, since these desires are so closely tied to our personal identity, in all likelihood we will not be detached enough and will become emotionally distraught. Dealing with the self-created identity. If we are to dismantle the self-created identity, we must focus our attack on two fronts. One being the negative associations themselves, and the other being the associations that form our understanding pertaining to the concepts. 1. The negative associations themselves. The thing to keep in mind in order for these associations to dissipate is A. To control our desire to want to be seen as specific concepts. Remember, this is the power source for the self-created identity, without which it cannot exist. However, it is not just as simple as this. Aside from being aware of our desire to be seen as specific concepts, we must also be aware of how we handle feelings of fulfillment that organically, not the result of us wanting to be seen as a specific concept, take place within our life experience. And lastly, C. We must be mindful of our judgments. We must operate, at least temporarily, as recovering addicts, since this is nothing short of what we are. A person who has been relying on being seen as specific concepts to achieve a temporary feeling of fulfillment must tiptoe around instances when said feeling is experienced. This is because their mind will automatically try to decipher what it was that made this feeling possible in order to attempt to recreate it, which consequently leads them to associating this feeling to being a specific concept. Individuals who do not rely on being seen as specific concepts in order to achieve a short-lived feeling of fulfillment do not have to tiptoe around feelings of fulfillment and happiness when these are organically encountered throughout their life experience. They do not have the tendency to associate these feelings to a concept as a result of an addiction to the feeling. Just as a recovering alcoholic must tiptoe around alcohol, whereas a person without this problem does not have to, we must be equally careful. Awareness tip. When engaged in conversation, we must avoid I as much as possible. We ought to focus on the other person and take a genuine interest in them. Find new things to discuss. This will force the mind to start shifting away from having everything revolve around the self-created identity. Upon putting this to practice, we will notice just how involved we truly are with the self-created identity and how rooted it is in our life experience. Via this practice, our focus will slowly begin shifting from what we identify as to other things. Download the complete book in order to follow along from the website. The link is in both the video and the channel description. Thank you so much.